Have you ever wondered why God decided to flood the world? And how Noah was chosen to be the one to save humanity? This isn't just a story about judgment, it's about a covenant that changed the future for all of us. In today's video, we're diving into the real story of Noah, exploring what really happened before, during, and after the flood. If you've ever gone through moments where you felt like everything was falling apart, this story can teach you about hope, purpose, and how God always offers a fresh start. Stick around until the end to see how God's covenant with Noah still echoes in your life today. Noah's story of the flood begins with something hard to imagine: the complete destruction of the world as it was known. The flood wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a divine judgment against the corruption that had spread across the earth. Imagine a world where evil had taken over so much that God, in His justice, decided to start over. This event marked a catastrophe like no other, a moment in human history where only Noah, his family, and the animals aboard the ark survived. Everything else was wiped out by relentless waters. But the devastation went beyond the physical destruction. The flood created a deep sense of separation between what once was and what was yet to come. Think of it as a turning point, where the old world, corrupt and hopeless, was replaced by a fresh chance to begin again. This story teaches us about the serious consequences of living far from just values. In our own lives, moments of catastrophe, while tough, can also be opportunities to rethink, restart, and reconnect with what really matters. Noah and his family survived because they obeyed God's instruction, and that obedience made all the difference. It's a clear lesson that in the middle of chaos, obedience to what's right can be our salvation. How many times do we face life's storms and try to figure it all out on our own? Noah shows us that following a higher direction than our own can be the key to surviving crises. The flood then represents not just destruction, but also the preservation of what is good and just. The floodwaters covered the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, which makes us reflect on the patience and resilience of Noah and his family inside the ark. They were isolated, not knowing what would happen next, but trusting that at the end of the storm, a new beginning awaited. Noah's faith teaches us that even when everything seems lost, there's always the possibility of a fresh start. And so, as the waters receded and the ark finally rested on Mount Ararat, Noah knew he was standing at the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. But what few people know is that the flood wasn't just a result of human corruption. It was also tied to a celestial rebellion that had been brewing long before the first raindrop fell. Long before the floodwaters began to cover the earth, a rebellion in heaven was already underway. Some angels, created to serve God, rebelled against His authority. These fallen angels didn't just abandon their divine roles. They began interacting with humanity in destructive ways, corrupting the world even further. These beings, known for their strength and power, strayed from God's will, and upon descending to earth, fueled the chaos and wickedness that led to divine judgment. Noah understood that the flood wasn't just a response to human corruption, but also to the imbalance caused by these fallen angels. The story of these fallen angels is closely linked to Noah's narrative. These spiritual beings defied God and chose to interfere in the human world, creating a generation of corrupted beings, known as the Nephilim. Imagine the impact of that on earth. It wasn't just human wickedness spreading. It was the direct influence of powerful beings who had turned away from the divine light. Though their influence is only briefly mentioned in Scripture, it played a key role in God's decision to cleanse the world with the flood. A complete reset was necessary. Noah knew that to save humanity and restore balance between heaven and earth, God's action needed to be radical. These fallen angels didn't just disobey, they taught humans to practice evil in unimaginable ways. They spread corrupt knowledge and behaviors that distorted the original purpose of creation. And here's where Noah's story becomes even more intriguing. The flood wasn't just a physical event, but a spiritual response to a rebellion that had started long before the first drop of rain fell. These fallen angels represent our own ability to stray from our mission, especially when we're seduced by power. Like them, we can often fall into temptations that pull us away from our goals and our true essence. This story reminds us to stay aware of the external and internal influences that can lead us off course. Unlike these angels, Noah stayed faithful to his mission, an example that even when chaos surrounds us, we can choose to follow God's will. The rebellion of the angels and the corruption they brought to the world was one of the central reasons for the flood, but it wasn't the only one. To fully understand what led to this judgment, we have to go even further back in history, to the creation of man and the beginning of disobedience on earth. To understand the true impact of the flood, we need to go back to the very beginning, to the moment when God created Adam and Eve, the first humans. They were made in the image and likeness of God and placed in the Garden of Eden to take care of the earth and live in harmony with creation. But this harmony was broken when they both disobeyed God by eating from the forbidden fruit, starting a long path of disobedience and sin. This act wasn't just a single transgression, it opened the door to the curse that would affect all future generations. Adam and Eve's disobedience shows us the fragility of the human condition. Even though they were created perfect, the temptation to go against divine order was too strong. This is something we can all relate to in our daily lives. How often do we know what's right, yet still give in to temptation? The original sin didn't just distance humans from God, it also introduced mortality and suffering into the world. From that moment on, the earth, which had once been a place of abundance, became marked by hardship, affecting all generations to come. The fall of Adam and Eve didn't just impact their own existence, it shaped the course of humanity. Their rebellion led to humanity being expelled from Eden, a place where there was no pain, suffering, or death. This departure from paradise reflects the spiritual separation we all experience when we make choices that pull us away from our true essence. And here, Noah enters the narrative as a descendant of Adam, living in a world far removed from the original harmony God had planned. The creation of man, followed by their fall, also brought consequences not just for humanity, but for the earth itself. The curse after their disobedience affected the soil, the animals, and all of nature. Work, which was once a source of fulfillment, became a burdensome task. This curse was present in Noah's world, where corruption and violence had become the norm. And here we see the direct connection between creation, the fall, and the flood. God needed to cleanse the earth to restore what had been corrupted. Even after humanity's fall, God chose not to abandon his creation. Through the generations, he found faithful individuals like Noah to preserve his covenant with humanity. Disobedience brought death and chaos, but the plan of redemption was still in motion. And as the generations passed, a new tragedy would emerge. The first murder in human history, a clear sign of how far humanity had drifted from God's original plan. The story of the first murder marks a dark moment in humanity's history, showing how deeply sin had taken root in the human heart since the fall of Adam and Eve. Cain, their firstborn, committed an act that would echo through generations. He killed his brother Abel out of jealousy and envy. Abel had offered a sacrifice that God accepted, while Cain's was rejected. Instead of seeking correction or understanding why his offering was turned down, Cain was consumed by rage. This act of violence wasn't just a family tragedy. It marked the start of a lineage of people who would drift further and further from God. The story of Cain and Abel teaches us a profound lesson about how we handle our emotions and the consequences of our choices. We all face moments where we feel wronged or rejected. The big question is, how do we react? Cain chose anger, and that decision led to a crime that not only took Abel's life, but further corrupted humanity. It's a powerful reminder that if we don't control our emotions, they can take us to dark places. Noah, as a descendant of Seth, the faithful line, witnessed how Cain's violence spread. The curse that God placed on Cain reflected the deep impact of his actions. He was condemned to live as a wanderer, separated from God's presence. This spiritual distance shows us that when we let evil control our actions, we not only push people away, but we also disconnect from our essence and from God. Cain became estranged from all that was good and just, and his descendants followed a dark path. Yet, in his mercy, God didn't completely abandon humanity. The lineage of Seth, Adam and Eve's third son, continued to uphold faith and obedience to God. While Cain's descendants represented corruption and spiritual separation, Seth's line symbolized the continuation of God's covenant with humanity. Noah, a direct descendant of Seth, inherited this faith and the responsibility of carrying forward God's plan, even in a world sinking deeper into wickedness. The story of Cain and Abel reminds us that there are always two paths, the way of obedience or the way of rebellion. Noah, seeing how Cain's descendants distanced themselves from God, watched as the world around him descended further into chaos. Violence, corruption, and spiritual separation had become the norm. Yet even in this dark landscape, he knew there was still hope, for God always preserves a faithful remnant. This remnant would lead to salvation during the flood. And as humanity became more corrupt, another mystery was unfolding. The emergence of extraordinary beings, the Nephilim, who contributed to the rising violence on earth. In ancient times, longevity was something remarkable. The first men lived for hundreds of years, like Adam, who reached 930 years, and Seth, who lived 912 years. This longevity, mentioned in Scripture, intrigues many, as it's not just about age but also accumulated wisdom. These early humans had the responsibility of passing down the story of creation, the fall, and God's covenant with humanity. They weren't just witnesses to the early days of creation, they were also guardians of deep spiritual knowledge. Back then, longevity also represented a delayed judgment. Imagine living for centuries, watching the growing corruption around you, knowing that wickedness was taking root in future generations. For these men, long life was both a blessing and a responsibility. They carried the weight of a sacred history and had to continue passing that knowledge down, despite the challenges. Noah, who lived 950 years, is a prime example of how patience and obedience over a lifetime made him worthy of being the instrument of salvation during the flood. The longevity of these men makes us reflect on the value of time. Today, our lives are much shorter, but the responsibility to pass down wisdom and preserve values remains. We may not have hundreds of years to fulfill our mission, but the intensity with which we live each day makes all the difference. What are we doing with the time we've been given? Noah, living for so long, dedicated his life to listening to and obeying God, even when everything around him seemed to be falling apart. He is a clear example that true longevity is found in living a life of purpose. For these men, time also allowed them to witness entire generations rise and fall. They saw humanity transform from a creation pure and in harmony with God to a society corrupted by violence and disobedience. This long-term vision gave figures like Noah a unique understanding of the depth of rebellion spreading across the earth and the need for divine intervention. The knowledge gained over their lifetimes gave them a perspective few today can understand. But even with the wisdom and longevity of these men, something dark manifested on earth. Extraordinary, powerful, and giant beings began to emerge, and their actions further contributed to the corruption and violence already dominating the world. These beings, known as the Nephilim, marked the beginning of a new phase of chaos on earth, a decisive factor leading to the approaching flood. Amid the growing corruption and violence that was taking over the earth, powerful giants known as the Nephilim appeared. These extraordinary beings, mentioned in Scripture, were the offspring of fallen angels who rebelled against God and took human women as their partners. Their presence on earth made the moral and spiritual decline of humanity even worse, as they brought not just physical power, but negative influences that further corrupted God's creation. The Nephilim became a living symbol of rebellion, both in heaven and on earth, and their existence was one of the key reasons God decided to send the flood. These giants weren't just a physical threat, they symbolized a complete distortion of God's original plan for humanity. The presence of the Nephilim shows just how far the world had strayed from the divine blueprint. They became feared figures, dominating and oppressing regular humans, and their actions led to an increase in violence and injustice across the globe. Corruption spread like a plague, and the earth, once created in perfect harmony, was now engulfed in chaos and destruction, much of it due to the influence of these beings. The existence of the Nephilim also teaches us something about the impact of negative influences in our own lives. Just as the presence of these giants corrupted Noah's society, we too can be swayed by forces that pull us away from our purpose. These beings represented a drastic departure from the natural order that God had established, and in our daily lives, we also face influences that try to twist our values and lead us astray. The story of the Nephilim reminds us that not all forces are visible, but they can still cause great destruction. Living in a world dominated by these giants, Noah stood as a lone figure of righteousness and obedience. While the rest of humanity bowed to the power and corruption brought by the Nephilim, Noah remained steadfast in his faith and commitment to God. His resilience in the face of such a dark reality inspires us to stand firm in our principles, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Noah knew that something bigger was coming, and even with the looming threat of the Nephilim, he trusted that God had a plan to save humanity. And that's exactly what happened. When God decided to cleanse the earth, he chose Noah to build an ark that would save his family and the animals. The presence of the Nephilim was one of the reasons God made this drastic decision, and now Noah had the monumental task of building an ark that would ensure the continuation of life on earth. But this was no easy task. The construction of the ark was an enormous challenge that required years of dedication and unwavering faith. When God instructed Noah to build the ark, he didn't just hand him a physical plan. He entrusted Noah with a huge spiritual mission. The ark would be the only salvation in the midst of the coming judgment. Noah, with obedience and faith, accepted the task. Imagine the challenge of building such a massive structure without modern technology or tools. Noah wasn't a professional carpenter, but he had something even more important: complete trust in God's guidance. Every nail he hammered and every plank he placed brought him one step closer to preserving life through the chaos that was approaching. The construction of the ark, which took years, was a testament to perseverance and patience. During that time, Noah faced mockery and disbelief. To many, the idea of a flood seemed ridiculous. Yet, Noah didn't let that bring him down. His determination to follow God's instructions, even when it seemed senseless, teaches us an important lesson about unshakable faith. How many times do we face challenges in life that seem impossible to overcome? Noah shows us that even when the task seems enormous, focus and faith can help us move forward. God gave Noah detailed instructions on how to build the ark, its dimensions, materials, and design. The precision of these instructions reminds us that, just like in life, God has a specific plan for each of us. It's not up to us to question or understand all the details right away, but to trust that there's a bigger purpose behind every step. Noah didn't question the plan. He trusted that even though he couldn't fully grasp it, God knew exactly what was needed to bring salvation. During the construction, Noah was also preparing himself spiritually. He knew that the flood was more than just a physical catastrophe. It was a spiritual reset for humanity. Every day he dedicated to building the ark was also a day devoted to his faith and relationship with God. This kind of spiritual preparation is something we often overlook in our own projects. Sometimes we get so focused on the physical results that we forget there's a spiritual aspect in everything we do. Noah shows us that by nurturing our faith, we're also getting ready to face any storm. Finally, when the ark was finished, it wasn't just a huge wooden structure. It was a symbol of God's covenant with humanity. Noah, his family, and the animals boarded, and the doors were sealed. What followed was a flood that wiped out everything except for those on the ark. And so, the ark floated above the waters, carrying the future of humanity and creation. When the waters finally receded, Noah stepped out into a renewed world. And in this new beginning, God made a promise, sealed with a rainbow, that he would never again destroy the earth with a flood. After the flood, Noah and his family emerged from the ark into a completely transformed world. The silence and vastness of the land served as a reminder of the divine judgment that had purified the earth. But at the same time, this new beginning came with a promise of hope. God made a covenant with Noah and by extension with all of humanity. He promised never to destroy the earth with a flood again, and the sign of this promise was the rainbow. This symbol not only represented God's mercy, but also his commitment to preserving creation, even in the face of human disobedience. God's covenant with Noah was a turning point in human history. It signified that even though sin and corruption still existed, God's grace would always be stronger. Imagine how emotional it must have been for Noah to see the rainbow for the first time, after everything he and his family had been through. God's promise wasn't just empty words, it was a visual covenant that would be remembered for all future generations. Even today, when we see a rainbow, we're reminded of God's faithfulness and his willingness to offer a second chance. This covenant teaches us about the power of restoration. The flood had been a harsh judgment, but the covenant showed that God is always ready to give humanity a new opportunity. In our own lives, how often do we face personal devastation, where everything seems lost? Noah's story and the covenant remind us that after every storm, there's the possibility of a new beginning. God's grace is always available to guide us back to the right path, no matter how far we've strayed. The rainbow, with its vibrant colors, is more than just a natural phenomenon. It represents an eternal covenant between God and creation. Noah, as a witness to this moment, saw with his own eyes God's commitment not only to preserve life, but to bless it. This covenant also points to a future where God's justice and mercy will continue to work together. Noah's story is a reminder that God's grace always follows judgment, and that he never fails to provide a way out for those who remain faithful. This covenant with Noah closed a chapter of destruction and renewal. It marked the start of a new chapter for humanity, a promise that would carry on through all generations. But Noah's story isn't just about judgment and promises. It's also a lesson on the importance of faith, obedience, and trust in God's plan, even when everything seems lost. Now that you've learned the real story behind the flood and the covenant God made with Noah, it's time to reflect. How does this promise still affect your life today? Just like Noah found grace in the midst of chaos, are you open to hearing God's call and finding your purpose even in tough times? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know how this story resonates with you. And before you go, have you heard about Elijah, the prophet who challenged kings and called down fire from heaven? In our next video, we're diving into the incredible story of Elijah and his powerful miracles. Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and stay with us on this journey of discovery.